This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey everyone, you are going to get such great nuggets from this conversation that I had with Ulrike Seminate. She is a dynamo leadership and communication coach who has lots of experience building on her experience as a C-level executive and kind of what happens when we can't bring our authentic selves to work. And she's very passionate about creating more human workplaces, but has a slightly different spin on it and really wants us to create spaces where people can show up as the person that they really are rather than showing up with what she calls our corporate persona. So I think you're going to have a lot of good wisdom of what do you do with yourself? What do you do with people of other types? So you're probably going to want to have a notepad or go back and listen to this again, particularly as we start digging in to what she calls the four limbic drivers and how that impacts our communication style and how we more effectively navigate ourselves and lead and influence others through change based on our understanding of those drivers. So, again, lots and lots of great nuggets I hope you're able to put into practice. All right, Ulrike, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. And I just want to jump in because one of the reasons I'm so excited is that we share a common passion as it relates to creating more human workplaces. And I would love if you would share what does that mean from your perspective?
From my perspective, human workplaces mean that people show up as the person they truly are. If we just think about how people behave with friends or family, I'm sure they speak very differently to people in private than they do at work. And to a certain extent, that makes sense for sure. But most people develop a corporate persona. And behind this facet of their corporate personality style is the true self. And I think in a human workplace, we would be able to open that up, this corporate armor which we carry with us to work. And that would make a true difference because this is then showing vulnerability as well, showing some emotions. Emotions at work are kind of banned from work. And to come up with something where everybody would just feel freer and more natural, more authentic.
There's so much in that I love. There was a saying many years ago, and I can't remember who said it, but it's something like, when we go to work, we leave our car window cracked so that our real self can breathe while we're at work. And the other thing that why I love that you're passionate about this as well is I think that was the norm for so long, where so many workplaces are unintentionally paying us for a second job they never intended to. And that's the hiding our inadequacies, hiding our flaws, impression management, and it has a cost. And let's be honest, as a human, it's exhausting, but it's also easier said than done. So I would love if you share a little about how did you become passionate about this?
By my own experience, first of all. I was a corporate leader, climbing up the whole hierarchy ladder, and I ended up for 3 years being a C-level executive. And that was for me a transforming experience, not only on the professional level, but I saw many things in myself where I thought, this is not right. And where this feeling of staying in my corporate persona is something extremely draining was very strong or became stronger and stronger. And I realized that something's wrong here and that this is probably why I'm still not happy with my role, even though I had a fantastic role. And I realized that going into this position, being a member of the executive committee, being the youngest one, being one of two women only, and the other woman was not very female in her behavior and in showing emotions at all, I felt like I have to play with the big guys now. I have to adapt even more than I did before. I have to put up this professional self of mine, whatever that is, all the time, never show any flaws, being really, really effective and all of that. And by doing this, I realized that many of my ideas felt under the table. I didn't share the creativity which I could have shared. I wasn't innovative as I could have been. So a lot of potential got lost. And that's why I came up with that must change, because obviously I'm not the only one in that position. And it's such a shame that their ideas get lost on the one hand. And on the other hand, that there's so much frustration, which people at the end create for themselves because they believe they can't do differently. And I think if we all started believing that we can do differently, then it would change. So it needs a certain critical mass also that people start doing this more and more and more, that it becomes the new normal.
It's interesting you talk about how the other female C-suite leader was leaning on hyper-masculine traits, and I think so often in the world of work, in particular, more corporate roles, there has been this overvaluing of money, power, and control that not only don't work for people who identify as female or women, but they don't work for men either, and right? And I think that they don't work for humanity because it is a core human need we all have to feel like we matter and we're heard and seen and we belong. And so if we have to shut off part of ourselves, like I hear from women all the time, right? In this environment, and I've experienced it as well. They'll say, well, if I have to really turn on and be hard nosed and tough and turn off that caring, emotive, nurturing side of me to be taken seriously, but then they feel crummy about it. Or I hear from my friends of color that they have to quote unquote act more white to be accepted. And then just the list goes on and on. Or if someone is LGBTQ, I have to act more straight. I have to be something other than I am to be successful, be effective. And it's exhausting, but it's also easier said than done because not all workplaces create environments and spaces where people feel it's safe to do that. Some of it's our own doing, like it's the stories we tell ourselves, but a lot of it is the environment. So, how do you reconcile that? Or how do you help people navigate that when sometimes maybe the environment doesn't support it?
I think you need to go step by step. Because, like you say, if you go from 0% to 100% showing up as yourself in an environment that does not tolerate it, you will get hit hard. You will be judged and all of that. And you will never do it again, most likely. And you will feel really horrible about yourself. And the first step is really to understand what really counts for you in your behavior. What values are you betraying that you do not want to betray anymore? And it's maybe not the full set of it at once. But I think there are some where you could make little steps out of your comfort zone, out of this safety zone, trying that out with people where it seems to be a little bit easier, also trying out not just being yourself or standing up for your opinion, potentially even sharing why you do that. That it's your uniqueness, that you want to show who you really are because you're unique. You have something to provide, to deliver, to contribute. And coming from that perspective, that I want to deliver more value by being myself. That is my whole aim here. More contribution because I'm stronger like this. And that is an intent in your mind that is totally different than the one like, I need to show up as myself because then I'm less frustrated or I might become more confident like that. That's a needy approach. And I think you should come from a I'm strong, I can contribute more approach, step by step. And yes, I agree, the environment can be very, very difficult. But there's also a part in you that makes it more difficult. We often overestimate how difficult the environment might be and might find out that there's a little pathway which we can take, which is still safe. No, it's maybe not the 100%, but maybe the first 20%, we could do these. And let's try with these 20%, do the learnings and going this path very consciously. I think that's the way of doing it and step by step, not big jumps.
I love that, and what's interesting because literally just yesterday, I was doing work with a leadership team, and we were having this discussion about how in the absence of data, our brain fills it in with story, and a lot of times those stories are catastrophizing, and it's foolish to lose in your own story, but we create these stories where, like, horrible things happen. It's like, why do we do that? And I know it's in our DNA and our wiring from generations ago, and that's part of being human. We're hardwired for that protective instinct and we're hardwired for negativity to watch out for threats. But to your point, it has a cost and it gets in our way. And so, one of the things I heard you say that I think is so important to circle back to is if we don't know our non negotiables or we don't know our core values as a human being, like these are the behaviors that help me show up in alignment with that. These are the behaviors that pull me out of alignment. If we haven't done that work for ourselves to get clear about who we are, what matters to us, and what those non negotiables are, I think it becomes harder to one, even know who we are, what makes us authentically unique, and how to bring that forward. But two, then even how to advocate for it because we really don't know. And sometimes it can be scary to look at who we are too, right?
And I always tell them there's nothing scary in it because what he will discover is a lot of hidden potential at the end. And for sure, he will discover fears and limiting beliefs, but As long as you do not discover them, they have power. And I think it's very important to do like a mapping of who we are actually, because people don't know, like you say, being clear about non negotiables. It's very interesting to just draw like a mapping what is important to you and identifying situations, very concrete ones at work, where these non negotiables actually got hurt last week, yesterday, recently, or very frequently in regular meetings again and again, or by the same person again and again. And to be very clear, where are these areas actually where I lose so much on myself? And where can I start? Is this an area where I want to start? And have an action plan, like a project manager of your own self, to say, okay, I see now very clearly where I lose my energy, where I'm draining so much on myself because, wow, I have to fight. And this area I want to tackle first. And making a conscious decision. And then it's really about your own commitment, generating the courage to do it and do it, as I said before, not all at once, step by step, but really committed to growing this area, to not just stagnating at a certain point and saying 10% is enough. It's not enough.
But I think there's something to that. We tend to be in go, go, go mode, and we don't stop to reflect to go, what went well and why did it go well or what didn't go well? And I think having that intentional reflection to go, oh, why did this go so well or why did this feel so great? Because I was able to live into my strengths or I was able to be aligned with my values or I was able to show up more authentically or whatever that might be. So when we start to kind of look at patterns, I feel safer setting boundaries or speaking up. Going back to the conversation I had yesterday, just because it's fresh, we were actually having a conversation around setting boundaries around your calendar and how people will just put meetings on your calendar and you don't know what it's for. And we were talking about pushing back and saying, well, can I get more clarification? Like, what's the purpose and what's the context and what are the different things? And so many people don't do that. And sometimes saying, sorry, I don't think this is a good use of my time. And they were like, I can't say no to a meeting. And I'm like, well, why not? Let's look at your beliefs. Let's look at your limiting beliefs that have you do that. So, anyway, very relevant. So, I'm curious because in talking about project managing ourselves, I know that project management can be a tool that can help us navigate change and kind of like you said, step by step by step. Like, I think it can be overwhelming when we look at it from a big picture, but when we break it down, it can look better. And we know that our rate of change is going up. Like, it just keeps exponentially increasing. It's not going to get any less complex. Change isn't going to stop. This is our world. And a lot of research in the human resources space has found that our capacity to handle change is half of what it was in 2019. So I think the disruption of our world is making it even harder for us to navigate challenges. And so many people struggle with navigating themselves through disruption and change, but also if I have to lead and support others through change, it just can feel daunting. I would love if you can talk about some of your learnings and how you help people navigate themselves as well as support and lead others through change, because I think so many people struggle with that right now.
I think when we speak about change, and what I see in organizations is that it's always treated as if the whole mass of human beings in the company were all the same. And that is the first and biggest mistake. One size fits all approaches in terms of communication, in terms of what you propose to people, what you think is motivating them. So when it comes to change, we first need to understand that most human beings, like 70, 80%, have the sense of security or the need for security and stability as the main driver in their limbic brain. This is why it's so hard to navigate change for us personally, for the teams, for organizations as such. If you're not a super fancy startup where only people are in there who love new things, then you will have a hard time to get through any change project, actually. So that's the first thing. And the first thing to understand then, logically, we start with ourselves. And we often don't do that. Change leaders don't do that. They think about what's the goal of this change project, what are the key messages, and then they bombard people with these messages. And I think when people have heard that, they must understand it. When they understand it, they must embrace it. So if you're motivated by power and status, it's totally different than if you're motivated by stability, for example. If you're motivated by change and new things, then you're very well off in a change project. But you might be motivated simply by people, by having social networks, by communicating and being together with people. And wherever you are, you need to first understand where are you and where are the people in your team. Are they motivated more by everything that's called dominance, power, and status? Are they motivated by what in the limbic driving systems is called stimulants? So they like change. Wonderful. Are they people who are more supporters, people who are harmonizers? Then it's a totally different story. Then you need to find something for them. First of all, for yourself, because you need to relate to the change project first. You need to find your own motivator. You need to find something that creates some stability. In a change project, you can never guarantee the outcome, but maybe you can guarantee something on the path towards it. At least some midterm goals or some midterm milestones or some ways how to get there or a certain stability in the team. It should be then your focus to maintain a stability in the team in terms of who is in that team, not switching people too often. So be very wary about that. What can you do to create stability? That's the trickiest question. When it comes to another profile, somebody who is in the dominance area, people like power and status, they want to have visibility. You cannot give them immediately a Euro title or a career step upwards or something like that. Probably not. But maybe there are occasions where they can show their expertise to an audience they're interested in or to specific stakeholders which they think are important for them. What's in it for them? Can you find something? So for the change likers, it's easier. It's just the change as such, which is great, new things. So that's an easy task, I would say. But then you have the people who are much more focused on the people level, the harmonizing people. Then you really need to be careful in change as well, because they fear a lot what that does to the team, what that does to the emotions of the different people. Are they treated well? As you can see, a totally different area of focus. And if you want to sell them that change, bring them on board, motivate them, make them embrace the change, and go through it with less pain because they find themselves a motivator for it, then you need to think about these parameters. And you need to think on an individual level when it comes to your team and when it comes to a whole organization, because you are the CEO, you have to think just all four areas and put something that for anyone. Everybody needs to find something, not just your goals. Most people communicate of their own perspective.
I love your approach because you're right. It's not a one size fits all. And what's coming up for me as you were talking about this is Peter Senge has a great quote that says, "People don't resist change, people resist being changed." And so often it makes sense because you talk about the limbic brain and you talk about those reward and threat centers in our brain. One of them is autonomy. So if we feel like our ability to choose is being taken away from us or someone's trying to get us to do something or doing the thinking for us, it puts us on high alert. And so we need to be able to see ourselves or feel like our concerns or whatever is being addressed and it makes it less scary. Let's go in a little more depth because one of the things that I love that you do is you combine this combination of these limbic drivers and critical communication skills. And you've touched on them a little bit, but I want to be very specific. Like, let's go through each of those four types of drivers and then the impact on our communication changes and preferences so people can see themselves or their team because I think that would be really helpful to unpack a little more.
Okay, so let's start with the dominance type because that's the typical leader. Or that's how at least we think with our bias that this is the typical leader. If you feel that you're more the dominance type, and that's not negative, some people think because they are those guys with the elbows, which can be true, right? But there are many positive sides to that as well. They're very result oriented. They get things through. They make things happen. Without these people, things would not happen ever. So they bring it to an end. We need people like that. If you're someone like that, you're very results oriented. In your communication, you just need to think more about the people aspect. You need to switch to more people orientation. If you imagine that in your way of thinking, your way of communicating, you should have half people orientation, half task orientation. And if you always just deliver with the task and you think that a task as such is a motivator, that the result as such is a motivator, it's not everything. It's just half of it. So what is the other half? And then we come a bit more to this humanize the workplace bit again, because that's what usually is not happening. We know this task oriented communication very well, and it's familiar and it's very neutral, and nobody's stepping on the toes of anyone really because it's result oriented. But we need to think more about what is the human aspect of that change? What does it mean to the team? Can I do something more to be a better listener when it comes to the personal problems, challenges that people might face with this new situation, even if it's not in my nature? Can I step beyond that out of my comfort zone and into something that becomes more personal as a conversation with my team members? So that could be an approach for someone who is more in this dominance area. Because the opposite of that person is the harmonizing person. So you see, you really need to get into this area to just cover these other 50%, which you're not covering.
With the dominance, what I love about what you're sharing is if people start to feel dismissed or I feel like someone doesn't care about me, that's going to hinder my ability to be effective to some degree, right? What's coming up for me is this whole idea of that people want to contribute to something, but also that when we make decisions, going back to the brain, we can kid ourselves, I think, that people are logical, rational beings. We know from tons of research that we are far more emotive and irrational beings. We make decisions with that limbic part of our brain, whether we realize it or not. It's not the part that has language, it's not the part that has facts and figures. We back it up with that part of our brain, but the decision making actually happens in that limbic brain. And so if we are strictly trying to inspire or guide people through change with facts and figures and results and to-dos alone, it's not going to work so well. So you started to talk about harmonizing. So say more about that type, what that looks like, and then what harmonizers need to pay attention to.
Harmonizers in change are very afraid of people losing their jobs, people not feeling well about that, people worrying too much. And they worry a lot about all others. And they think that this is how they have to do that because that's naturally how they react. So when you're more on that side, it's healthy to just get out of that a little bit and to get more in the more factual area. So more into the results orientation. Just stick a little bit more to the facts that you can see in this project. It sounds a bit awkward to say that when we said before that we want to humanize the workplace, but actually people who are more in this harmony area are usually the minority, that they're never really the majority anywhere in the corporate world. So if you're in this minority, get away from the idea that everybody is suffering like you do, because most people don't suffer that much if you're not looking so much into this empathy piece. Care of yourself, but then start being a little bit more factual in all the other areas and also in your communication. So, not overly bringing your fears into that, and just try to stay calm and try to communicate from this other perspective. If somebody who's very result oriented, you might want to try to communicate like this person, to just try out what that does to you and how this changes the interaction between you and the other person. And it's not about playing a role, it's just about embracing a new way of your facets because we all have the four different facets. We're not expressing some of them because it's just not dominant in ourselves.
What's interesting with that is whether they're actual harmonizers, but when this takes over, maybe they won't speak up or they're the person who tries to interject when there's a conflict rather than letting it play out. It's all that hyper harmony, I guess I would call it. And that actually doesn't help because I will tell you that if someone is not addressing a conflict or not speaking up, it actually causes more frustrations. And I would love your thoughts on this, but my experience with working with people who fall more into that harmony is they think they're being caring, they think they're being empathetic, they think they're being people person, and they actually are unintentionally frustrating the heck out of the people that they're caring about because they're either not being clear or they're coddling too much. And again, we know growth doesn't happen in our comfort zone. So it's this balance of I care about you and let's talk about how this is going to get us there. Let's talk about next steps. Or sometimes they don't provide enough direction or they don't provide enough clarity, which also frustrates people because they're doing work, but they don't understand the why or the purpose behind it. Is that fair to say around harmonizers?
Yeah, I agree. And especially when they're in a leadership position. It's not often that they are in leadership positions because they don't feel very comfortable with that. However, a harmony person can be a wonderful leader, actually, but they have to understand how to use that well. And like you say, you need to give direction even if you feel like being too harsh already, whereas you're probably not. It's about going into the conflicts in that sense that very often with harmonizer people being at the top of a team, it can happen that a team suffers a lot because the harmonizer person doesn't want to have conflicts with other departments. So these other departments or the people of them are stepping over the people in their team, loading a lot of work to them, which is not even belonging to that team because the harmonizing person doesn't want to have the conflict with the others. And by this is penalizing team members. So you really need to think of, okay, at some point I have to stand up for my opinion, even if I might hurt the feelings of someone else, because if not, others are penalized by the weakness that they show in their way of expressing their values. Because we all know that in the corporate world, it's not all harmony. People try to get more territory here and there, and you need to just get into this more affirmative mode.
Yeah, so it's not getting sucked in at the detriment of the whole organization or other teams or a bigger project or a bigger purpose, right? We get so focused on the immediacy. So let's talk about what's the next type that shows up and how does that type become effective?
Let's speak about stimulants people, which are those who love the change. So they are also more people oriented than task oriented. They get very quickly excited about things and then they give them up very quickly again as soon as it's routine. Sometimes they are excited for 2 days and then they're not excited anymore. So it's very easy to get excited or to bring enthusiasm to them with a proposal of a change project. But it can be that next week they are just utterly bored by it already. It's great to have them, but it's difficult to carry them through the process. And if you are now, for example, a balanced type, that means the person who is aiming for stability and security, you are most likely very irritated by these people because they are usually also very loud. They laugh a lot, they make jokes immediately. So, understanding that this profile, from the perspective of a stability person, is obviously a difficult profile, has a lot of upsides as well. You need to canalize their energy. On the one hand, if you want to really have a discussion as a stability person with someone who is a stimulants person, you need to level up your energy. You need to bring in more enthusiasm into your voice. You need to just generate more energy from the heart, being more enthusiastic about something. If you explain them with pure dry facts why something is good to do, you land nowhere. So you need to bring in something that is just a bit more exciting and you need to say it in a more exciting way, which I know from some profiles I have coached as well, is super, super, super hard to do because they're so much on the analytical and very, very calm side. And it's hard to connect with people from the other side. So you just need to get into their energy a little bit. And the other way around is the same thing. If you come as a stimulants person to a whole team of people who love stability and you sell them how great this change project is because there's so much in it, what we can learn and what we can explore, and you freak them out. You can't do that. So you need to understand from that perspective, tune it down is exactly the opposite. A little bit less energy, not the full enthusiasm about the change as such, but you really need to think hard. And for these people, it's very hard because they don't need it, but you need to think hard. What kind of stability can I provide? What can I tell them where I can promise a little bit more safety? And you speak to a group for majority of people who need stability. You can say, guys, I love change. I know for you, this is quite a challenge, and I completely appreciate that. So you can address your personality style openly. I think this is the best thing that you can do because that also shows who you are. It's a good way of being authentic. And it opens up the door for other people to adapt their communication intuitively to your style because they understand why you are so different, why you have this different perspective.
I love that. And you know what's interesting when you talk about stability, because I know there's stability type, but we also know, like you said, 70 or 80% of limbic brain, and we want something that feels a little more certain. Ron Friedman's latest book, it came out last year, but Decoding Greatness, when he talks about how we have innovation or have new ideas, he talks about the fact that radical new ideas freak the heck out of most people. And so, whether it's a weird type of music or whatever, like that's so different that our brains can't absorb it. And so we do need something that is a little familiar, but then like a variation on it. So if we're coming with something that is completely radical, but we don't have a way to connect it to something, it is going to be hard to move it through. And the other thing that you said that I think really comes back to when we talk about being our authentic self, I think this is an important point to highlight is when I'm working with people, when they do assessments or whatever, learn more about themselves, there can be this sense of almost, well, that's just who I am. So I'm being my authentic self. Well, we can also overuse and misuse our strengths, our talents in a way that is off putting. So if I show up over whatever it is, dominant or over harmonizing or whatever it is, where I can't connect with other people, where I can't collaborate with other people, where I can't have the impact I want to have. Basically, I'm taking up space and not creating space for other people. We have to know ourselves so we know when to ratchet up and when to hold back, but also then say something a slightly different way. And that's not about being who we are, that's about being effective. And I think the more we know ourselves, we can do that. Like we can be a healthy expression of our authentic self, and we can be a disruptive expression of our authentic self. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, resonates very much. And this is the whole tricky thing because the people always think like, yeah, but if I myself, I'm like polarizing or I am polarized because like you say, you can be very extreme in that. You can become very extreme. And that's not the strength in it. And you will not feel very well with that because like you say, you will lose connections. Most likely you will harm your relationships by that. And it needs to be a balance between staying true to yourself. This integrity with yourself is something. And then it comes to values, definitely. What are your values, your non negotiable ones? And using your strengths in a measured way. And that's the whole trick of good conversations, good communication, and ultimately good leadership is that you are able to bring it back to this limbic system with four inner drivers, that you are able to use your drivers according to the situation. And even if you feel like you're an 80% dominance, 20% stability person, and all the rest doesn't resonate at all, you still have that rest. You have it. You have parts of it. And most likely, these parts are even bigger in your life than you think. You're just overlooking them because you have created for yourself a vision of who you are somehow. But you can mobilize it. And I think that's real emotional intelligence, is about using these different elements in yourself and being able to adapt without losing yourself. Doesn't mean you lose yourself. And I think people feel that immediately. It's a gut feeling. You feel it. You feel if you stay yourself or if you betray yourself right now. Even if you slip into the shoes of another person, even if you slip into a different communication style, you will feel if this is still congruent with yourself or if it feels like I'm playing a role and I'm starting to being an actor and not myself anymore.
I love that. What I'm taking from that is a question we can keep asking ourselves is, am I being true to myself in this situation and being effective, or am I betraying myself? So speaking of, I'm just going to say betraying ourselves. That's a good segue. So one of the things that I am passionate about, maybe even obsessed with, is normalizing the messiness of being human and going back to in the absence of data, our brains filled in with story. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that we all, on some level, have this called our childhood version of ourself that hijacks us and tells us these stories, usually coming from that limbic brain, that are designed to help keep us safe and protect us, but they come at a cost. They're self limiting, they keep us small, they keep us from showing up authentically. So, what I would love, Ulrike, would you be willing to share what is a self limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so you can show up as a leader in your life and show up authentically?
My biggest self limiting story, and the one I still work on quite a lot, is that I think I shouldn't make a fuss. I shouldn't stand out. I shouldn't be on front of the stage. I should be humble and in the background and don't annoy people and don't disturb people. And it's very strong in me because that's what I was ingrained in me as a little child that I should not do that. And it's just there. And even though I have spoken on stages and I love to do that, when I'm in situations where I could speak up, but I know that I have to interrupt someone to do that, I often don't do it still. And in my professional life, in my corporate life, when I was not aware of this trigger, of this limiting belief, basically, of myself, I so often did not speak up and afterwards regretted it because I couldn't say my opinion and things went wrong because the more responsibility you have, the more things go wrong then afterwards if you haven't spoken up in a specific meeting where you needed to say something. So it is something that causes a lot of damage out there if you don't do that. So that's my limiting thing. Now, today, knowing this, I call it my inner brakes. So I verify when I'm in a situation where I feel like holding back, if I have really now put on the brakes again and I see the brakes acting. And then I can take a decision of, well, releasing them or not. Releasing them means, oh, it's uncomfortable. And I deliberately put myself into situations where I do that. That's the only way of learning how good it feels then to release these chains and to overcome that. And it's not being crazy all the time because that's just not my nature, probably, but at least being able to release that more often. The older I got, the more these breaks were acting, the stronger they became, the less spontaneous I became. Like I said earlier on, you need to understand what is happening inside of you to make a change. Because how can you start acting on something where you have no clue what it is? You need to be very concrete about that. and find the root causes, and then you can take a decision to act on that. And it's still not a winning game. You still have to put in a lot of commitment and get out of the comfort zone, really be willing to be uncomfortable.
I love that you refer to it as breaks, right? Sometimes like, oops, I got the brakes or I have the emergency brake on, right? I can have a choice to release it. I really love that visual. And I also appreciate you saying it's never going to go away because we have to realize these stories aren't going to go away. They were created in childhood, but what we can do is replace them with a newer, more relevant, more truthful, more effective story when those pop up because they're still going to be there. If you think they're going to disappear, like maybe you're a magician, but I've yet to meet someone where those completely go away. They just get quieter or they get less intense, that type of thing. So I love that. All right. Are you ready for quick questions?
Yes,
Here we go. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is,
being true to yourself.
love it. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
Search the courage in your heart and search the motivation why we want to do that. And then put all your forces and you will, sheer will, into it. Commit and do it.
Love it. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
That I'm totally getting crazy on the dance floor. Despite my breaks. This is a totally different area.
Okay, I used to ask this on a previous version of my podcast. What is your go-to dance or dance move?
I adapt to everything. I just express myself. I close my eyes and whatever comes up, is it a Latino thing? Is it hip hop? Is it rap? Is it rock? I don't care.
It's like a big old Zumba class. I love it. That's awesome. What is your favorite go-to movie?
Oh, yes, I do have one. The 70s Czech version of Cinderella in the snow. It's beautiful. I watch it every Christmas. And I think I love it that much because the lady is not the typical woman who is the victim and the prince is saving her. She's very self determined and very cute.
It's like an empowered tweak on Cinderella. I love that. All right. What is your go-to song?
Don't Stop Me Now from Queen and all its variations, especially when there were new registerings of other groups, which made it even more punchy. But the message, I love it. I could just sing along with it.
All right. What is something you can't live without?
For the moment, it's chocolate.
Okay. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
My ordinary daily life is more about the interactions. I don't have children, so there's just my husband and my two cats. These are basically my children. That makes me happy.
That's awesome. And what are you grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for having the opportunity to live my mission, the vision to create my vision of my life and to be conscious about that. I'm super grateful that I gained that consciousness of what I really want. And I need to relativize that of who I am because that's an eternal journey which is never finished.
I love that for you. All right, my final closing question for you, Ulrike. If you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
I would say listening, truly listening for understanding, not for replying. Listen to understand. And by this, everything would be different because you'd be empathetic automatically. So it would change everything.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.